Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started with the 9 o'clock leadership skills session. We're lucky to have Dr. Matthew Hammer from UT Southwestern, as well as Dr. Heitkamp from Indiana University. They're both going to give about 20, 25-minute talks, and after which you guys will have a chance to ask questions. So think of, keep in mind anything that you find interesting or that you want to hear more about. You'll have hold your questions, though, till the last 10 minutes. So we'll get it started with Dr. Hammer.
Well, thank you very much for having me today. I'm Matt Hammer from Children's Medical Center in Dallas, part of UT Southwestern, and I was a chief resident at Michigan, and I was the ACUBE president in 2011, 2012 now, so several years ago. And the point of this next hour is that I'm going to discuss some leadership issues and maybe some skills that I encountered as a chief resident, and Dr. Heitkamp's going to talk more from a program director's perspective on some of those issues. So I will get started, and I don't have any disclosures, sorry about that. But so, you know, initially tasked with discussing all leadership skills needed for chief residents. I mean, that can be a little bit of a daunting task. I don't know how to do that. But what I do know is that I'm talking to a fairly diverse group out here. There's new incoming chief residents. There's some of you transitioning from junior to senior residents, and there's some outgoing chief residents. And the other thing to keep in mind is, as you'll find out during these sessions, all programs are quite a bit different. Maybe you know, the things you have to do are different, the size of your programs are different, but you'll notice that a lot of the themes and a lot of the things that we're going to talk about and suggestions you can apply to your program. So I'm going to touch on some leadership points and the various roles you have to play as a chief resident, and hopefully generate some ideas for our idea forum down the line later today as well. So there was a paper from 2007 that actually looked at internal medicine chief residents, but I think it applies certainly to radiology and others. And they saw a chief resident as a middle manager. So as a chief resident, you work with your co-residents, you teach, counsel, support them, but you also answer and have meetings with the program director, the faculty, the chairman, as well as the hospital system generally. So you're getting kind of pulled by both ends, and you're one of the ultimate facilitators between these important groups. You may also deal with nurse practitioners and managers, you know, within your department, especially when it comes to education. And also you may be interacting with co-chief residents, your co-chief radiology residents, as well as meetings with chief residents in other departments. So you can see that you kind of are interacting with a lot of people on all sides. But before you can really delve into working with your co-residents, you sort of have to understand yourself. And one way to do that is take these personality inventories, you know, where it says if you're an introvert or extrovert, I'm ESTJ, all those kind of things. And actually, just about every other year at this conference, the morning session is dedicated to doing that personality inventory. And the reason for doing that, we're not doing it this year, that we may start doing it every other year again, is that before you can help others, you have to understand yourself, and you have to know how you interact with others. Not every person is exactly like me, fortunately. But you know, to understand that maybe someone with a quite a bit different personality, you have to deal with them in very stressful and situations and in times of conflict, and you have to recognize that you have to handle each circumstance specifically and tailor it to whoever you're interacting with. And in keeping with kind of understanding yourself, when you become a chief resident, I started kind of reflecting on my own practices in residency. You know, I don't know, you may be the person who's the first person to the morning conference every week, or maybe you're the person who kind of comes in a little late and maybe slips out a little early. But that is something to kind of be honest with yourself with, because a kind of new and kind of unusual role that you may be taking on is that of a role model. I mean, you may be having to tell residents, hey, you guys need to come to morning conference. You know, the faculty aren't happy about that. But if you're not the one coming either, it's sort of a hard thing to do that. So you may need to demonstrate that attendance and behavior as a new chief resident. One thing that surprised me is my relationships, even with co-residents, changed. You know, I had a lot of friends in residency, but once, and maybe some of the outgoing chief residents may agree with this, is that your relationships change a little bit. You know, they look at you a little bit differently, like, oh, are you trying to do something for the residency when you say that? Or, they may come to you with complaints that, you know, you had never heard before, and that applies to faculty as well. And also, as a chief resident, you sort of set the tone for teamwork for your residency. I mean, some residencies go through periods where just kind of everyone's a little disgruntled, or maybe times where everyone's really happy. And you, as a chief resident, you kind of, you know, can set the framework for that. You don't have to change who you are, but you have to realize, especially as a chief, that your actions, and if you're out there complaining about everything, that's sort of, well, if he's unhappy, then I should be unhappy too. So your actions do have consequences, so you have to kind of be honest with yourself. Charles Barkley here, he had that famous commercial where he says, I'm not a role model, and even though you may not think of yourself, or even you may not be a role model, but you sort of are in a way, so you just sort of have to accept that. So in terms of working with your co-residents, you also have to be approachable, and that may mean being physically approachable, like you have to be around a little bit more. Maybe you have to spend a little more time in the education office where you're touching base with the program coordinator and others. And regardless of your personality, maybe you're someone who everyone comes to anyway, but if you're not, you have to be someone who people are willing to come up to. And that particularly applies to junior residents. I remember when I was a first-year radiology resident, I didn't know very many of the senior residents, but the ones that I would approach would probably be the chief residents. And now with you in that role, you kind of lose that perspective sometimes, but that's something to keep in mind. And another thing as chief is that you really have to build up the trust with the residents, because you may be the initial person that they approach for confidential issues or personal issues, which we'll discuss a little bit too. And I think one of the main roles as a chief resident is being an advocate, and that can be within your department between you and the faculty, and we'll touch base about that more in just a minute. But something else that surprised me is I felt like I was being an advocate more for outside of the department. I was representing the radiology field as well as my department at a hospital levels and to other specialties, and I'll give an example of that. So I was at a meeting of like the chief residents of every different department. And during that, one of the ENT residents just sort of threw out there like, well, we never get a radiology report for our cases, so it doesn't even matter, when they were talking about radiology. And I was sort of like, I could have just let that go, but I said, hold on a second there. So we actually track our turnaround times for all our report and have a percentage that's really good for under an hour. So I gave him that information, and I said, in addition to that, we track our concordance rate between our preliminary and final reads. It's really good. Nationally, it's 98, 99% concordance. So, we have that too. And I also said, if you have any questions, I'll give you, again, the easily remembered phone number that everyone else in the hospital knows. And I said, just pay, in case you forgot. But I said, page me. I'm the chief, page me at home. I'll direct you to the right person. They never did that. But if he had paged me at 10 at night, I would have said, yeah, call this number. I'm happy to do that. Sometimes just taking ownership of a problem like that, saying, page me. I still do that now. Someone calls me about something random. I say, well, if you don't get help with that, just call me anytime. I'll figure out how to do that. And most of the time they won't, but I think it's reassuring for someone to know that you're taking ownership and you're available. So this is a topic, the logistics of what you do on behalf of your co-residents is something that we'll talk a lot about. A lot of you, as talked about in the survey, you do your work schedule, you do your call schedule, you may do teaching. And the only thing I'll say about that, which applies to the turnover of chief residents year to year, as well as our organization, A Cubed, is try not to reinvent the wheel. When you become the new chief resident, I spent 2 or 3 hours figuring out the best way to figure out how to do the call grid. And it's like, well, if they had just told me that before or showed me exactly, I wouldn't have had to spend 4 hours doing that before I now start actually making the schedule. So I think, and something I'll talk about more in just in a few minutes, is try not to reinvent the wheel. Try to get as much information from the former chiefs as you can. And then there's, this kind of wide issue that they'd have multi-day sessions talking about, and that's sort of interacting with your other residents. And these are all things that you do in conjunction with the program director and the educational committee. There may be residents in your program who are kind of academically behind, and it may in part be the chief resident's role to kind of help them or guide them in addition to the program director. And then there's obviously personal issues. You may have a resident kind of randomly come up to you and say, oh, I'm thinking about not doing radiology anymore, or, oh, I have this issue going on at home. And obviously it's not the chief resident's issue alone to deal with that, but you may be the first person, and you may kind of triage, the issue to the program director and to others within the department to get them their help. And then there's the whole issue with like problem residents, and I think we all know them, like the doesn't show up for call or last minute request kind of things. And I'll just say that I don't have all the answers to that, but it's kind of goes along with the personality interactions and kind of to be handled on a case-by-case basis, but always stay professional. And with all of these issues, I think confidentiality is really important. And the idea of being confidential, or having that confidentiality with co-residents may be something you didn't necessarily do much before you were a chief. So now kind of talking about what you do with the faculty and program directors, I'm not sure as Darel will mention, working with the program director is kind of your key thing, and your relationship with the program director, he or she kind of guides you, and they're your go-to person. So you need to have that close relationship. They need to make expectations very clear one way or the other, so you know what you're doing, because there's nothing worse than kind of not knowing what you're supposed to do in some circumstances. And it's also nice to have a sense that you and the program director, you as the chief, and the program director kind of have each other's back, or at least that if you're going out on a limb on an issue, that they'll be there for you to support you or not, and you know that in advance, and you can kind of pick your battles. And then obviously they'll work with you on individual issues. And sort of touching back to the thing about the not reinventing the wheel, our program director and us, we came up with the standard operating procedures for chiefs. So, this isn't to be looked at specifically, all of these details, but, it's a short Word document that says these are your responsibilities. You have to plan journal club. You have to go to this conference. You have to do this conference every month. You have to schedule this big list of things. And, we started this and that, a couple ideas, and you should think about keeping those going moving forward if you want. So it can be a short thing, but that can kind of facilitate the year-to-year turnover in chiefs and keep everyone on the same page. And, working with faculty as a resident advocate, again, that's sort of your main role, right? You're taking issues that are important to residents and taking them to faculty, and then vice versa, sending it back down. And I found working with faculty to be, it was one of the most interesting parts of what I did. There were some faculty who I thought were just awesome for residents and great residency advocates who behind the scenes I was like, wow, that is actually the opposite, which is disappointing and surprising. But then I found the opposite to be true too. Someone who I thought, oh man, this person's always trying to jam up the residents. But then behind the scenes, they were one of the biggest advocates. So I think it's good to keep an open mind when you're working with them. And the other idea is that it's easy to say yes. When someone says, hey, another person has to be on call at night starting next week, or starting this summer, you could just say, okay, yeah, sure, that sounds good. Probably they'd be happy with you if you said that. But, the alternative is to kind of advocate on behalf of the residents and say, hey, well, if that's true, if we need another person, then they need Monday off. Or, then we get to redo the call schedule and arrange how people are on to our liking. And really advocate for yourself in that way, because especially early on when you're new, everyone else in the program director and everyone else has been doing this for for potentially years, and you're brand new, and it's kind of hard for you to say, well, hold on, I'm going to tell you how we're going to do this. But I think it's again, you're advocating on behalf of the residents. What would the other residents say in any situation? And that's your job to advocate on that behalf. Being transparent is basically just being honest, and don't, let people know that if you're thinking about doing something, just what your thoughts are. Don't be disingenuous or promise things that, that you can't come through, and things of that nature. And finally, something that I noticed was that, once I became chief, if I was staffing out with a faculty, all of a sudden they started running some resident issues by me or give me their ideas. And it's kind of the same thing with co-residents. So you'll start to get a lot more information, or people are asking you questions or requesting things. And it's good to kind of consider what to take away from that. And obviously be honest and don't promise anything, but it is a good source of information and kind of hearing about what's going on, and you can consider what the next best action is. And I would also say to just sort of stay professional and kind of be true to yourself, even if others are not, whether that's co-residents who are just sort of totally freaking out about something, or even faculty who may not be acting totally professional in some way. If you just stick to your guns, I think that's always the right way to go. I think one of the coolest things about being a chief resident are coming up with new ideas. So whether it's innovating the call schedule or just the work schedule, or coming up with a quality project, education, the way you do residency interviews if you're involved in that. I think it's surprising that even though in academics, change can be kind of a slow thing and not always accepted right away. I think that's an understatement probably. But having said that, I think if you come up with a really good idea and think it through and, can try to think through all the pluses and minuses and present that idea, I was surprised how often it was listened to and accommodated actually if you think through it rather than just throwing something random out there. And if you do, sometimes we would do that through surveys. We'd survey your co-residents and say, hey, which of these 3 call systems do you want? The only thing I'd kind of caution for that is that a lot of times the decision was made and then we would get a survey and everyone sort of knew that. And that's a little disingenuous, and that tends to make people more upset than if you didn't do that at all. So if you're going to have a survey and ask people's opinion, you really need to take that into account and show that it's a genuine thing and not just for show. and to be kind of open and flexible in general. Even after you make a decision, you want to keep getting feedback and update things appropriately, but at the same time, you need to, stick to your guns and say, I know there's going to be growing pains, but this is the call system we picked, and we're going to just go for it and see how it goes. So you need to be somewhat decisive there. I always try to throw in a demotivator from despair.com. Innovation, if it can make your job easier, it can probably make it irrelevant. So that's sometimes what I think of things. In terms of your interaction with the hospital system, again, like I mentioned before, kind of an interaction at a departmental level or at a residency level, and quality initiatives oftentimes chief residents are involved with at a hospital system. So one example I'll give during one of my interactions. So a lot of the departments were doing quality surveys, so we actually came up with a quality survey, kind of on behalf of the hospital system for radiology. And we wanted to understand what the radiology clinician, the people who interacted with on-call radiology residents, what their needs were, what they thought we were doing, or what they thought, how good they thought we were, and then their overall satisfaction. So we came up with a survey. Again, we asked, are we available? Do you know what our discordance rate is? Do you feel confident? Are you satisfied with the overall thing? So it turned out that they thought that our discordance rate between the prelims and the finals was like 25%. It's actually like 1%. So we actually kind of promoted that information, or just sort of gave them the proper information during educational sessions, as well as just informing them that, yes, we're actually available at this number during the day, which they may not have known about. And we ended up doing a second survey, and it improved understanding in all these areas, and the satisfaction number overall went up. But this served a couple purposes. One, it actually improved what we were doing. Now, actually, this sounds crazy now, but we were transitioning from actually faxing our prelim forms to putting them up online, which, that sounds so crazy now. Okay, it wasn't that long ago, right? I've just graduated, I thought. But that made such a big difference for them viewing it. So I think through all this project, it kind of facilitated us improving the service that we were providing, and it also kind of improved their understanding of what radiology did. So people actually had a better impression of radiology as a whole after all this, when they're like, oh, I thought you guys missed every case. We're like, no, we don't miss everyone, actually. We get them right every once in a while, like 99%. So some of the summary points here is, you get a lot of new responsibilities, and you take on these new roles as a role model and kind of a representative of radiology as a whole, which most residents are kind of, day by day thinking of, I need to learn radiology, I need to go home, I need to pass my core exam. And I think as chief was the first time I really realized some of the bigger pictures of radiology as a department and the field of radiology as a whole. You start dealing with some of these sensitive matters, and your relationship with your residents may change, your co-residents may change. Got to be available and transparent. Obviously, the most important thing is working with the program director. And then consider that operating procedure standard, write something down for what you do to pass on in the future. And, I'll just say a couple of final things, which is that, chief residency, it's a really unique position, and there's no other time you'll be in a role like this. Even as a program director, you're not as close to residents as you are as a chief. And I think even though it's sort of a stressful time, you'll look back fondly upon it. And I think, I learned so much, and I obviously had a great time participating in this organization. It meant a lot to me. So it really is, even though it can be kind of scary at first, it's a really exciting time, and try to get through the stressful parts of it. And, the main thing is some of the points that I brought up here, I don't necessarily give all the answers because I don't necessarily have them, and you kind of have to learn on your own. But some of these new responsibilities, I hope you write some things down on that note card, turn it in at lunch. We can talk about it in the idea forum. We can bring things up more and develop those ideas, answer questions. And that's the whole point of this meeting and our whole program, is to take these issues, some of which I talked about, and turn it into a bigger discussion and figure out something to take back to your program going forward. So that's all, and I just wanted to make again mention, coming to the elections is super important. It's really great to be involved in the leadership. It's late this year. It's usually at 2 o'clock. It's at 5:30 after the Brogdon panel, and I just ask everyone to please come to that. Learn about the positions a little more, and we'll talk a little bit more about how we do the elections. It's not actually, we'll talk about the logistics of that soon, but please come on Wednesday. It's really important. I know it's late. Please come after the Brogdon panel. And it's in the same room, where most of our stuff is. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Great job. Excellent talk, Matt. My name is Darel Heitkamp, and I'm from Indiana University. And my voice is awful. You guys are going to hate this talk. It's going to be a long 20 minutes. Okay, so I have interesting sort of data to show you guys, interesting information. So there's well over 4,000 radiology residents in the country. And they represent 187 ACGME accredited radiology residencies in the U.S. And of those 4,000 residents, there's about 450 chiefs. All right, so you guys are members of an elite club. A small subset of those chiefs actually belong to A cubed. There's only 150 registered members of A cubed CR squared as of today. And of those 150 members, only 134 registered for this conference and are here. Okay? So that's amazingly Darwinian, okay? We've selected really the best of the best, I think. And so you've all come together in this room, not by chance, but by fate, right? You're kind of leading these parallel lives. You all managed to keep yourselves alive through college. You all got into medical school. You got into radiology when radiology was still competitive, right? and then you got elected chief resident. And not only that, you're not one of the 450. You're one of the 134. So you have the initiative and the enthusiasm, and you just care to learn things and to make your program better. So you're here with all of us to try to learn things. So that's fantastic. Just look around at these people in this room. I mean, really, look around at people. Look people in the eyes. These are your people. Okay, they get you. They understand you. They feel your pain. All the problems you have in your program, the difficulties, the problem residents, the problem faculty, the difficult faculty, the issues that come up, they've all done that too. We have the same issues by and large, and we struggle with the same things. But what's great about this conference is that many of us have actually come up with really innovative solutions to those problems. So the question is, who is that? Who did that? And that's the whole point. I think that's kind of the quintessential aspect of this society and this conference, is to share those ideas. That's why we're pushing these note cards. We want to find out, who's having problems with what. So anyway, you guys are the leaders. Peter and I, we should be sitting there, and you all should be telling us what your secrets are. Lots of opportunity. If you choose to take advantage of everything this conference offers, you will really promote your careers. These are just a few things. Certainly the big ones are networking and the fellowship search, the job search. Those are huge, because the people who are here are fellowship directors, program directors, chairs, faculty members who are very educationally minded, vice chairs of educations, chief residents. So this is like the ultimate place to network. It's just you need to take advantage of that on day one. So today you need to start being, perhaps more assertive than you normally are. So ask yourself, what is it you want for the next phase of your career? So are you looking to get into a certain fellowship, a very specific one in a certain city, or are you just concentrating on, neuroradiology? Are you interested in global health or informatics or women's imaging? Once you've answered that question, then you need to start targeting the right people. And they're here at this conference. Okay, so don't waste any time. I find the easiest sort of segue to doing that is to talk to the chief residents at those institutions. All right, so if you have your mindset on doing like a neuro fellowship at UCSF, let's say your spouse is from Northern California, from San Francisco, you'd love to be there, then your work's cut out for you, right? So you should start by finding the chief residents, ask them, hey, who's at this meeting? Is the fellowship director at the meeting? The program director? Any neuro faculty? Start there. But don't waste the opportunity. Mentoring is also huge. If you hear somebody talk this week and you are buying what they're selling, you're drinking the Kool-Aid, I'm on board with this guy, then go up and talk to him afterwards. Everybody's very approachable. Ask questions, exchange contact information, and you'd be surprised at how many mentors are actually obtained and established at a place like this. I have 2 mentors. They're not faculty at IU, but I see them twice a year at AUR and RSNA. One's at Vermont and one's now at Vanderbilt. And so they've helped me along, and it was this conference that made it happen. So look for your mentor. We've talked about this whole problem-solving bit. So just think of I want you to think of the top 1 or 2 issues in your program that's just weighing you down. You can't seem to solve it. Everything you've tried has failed. And bring that this afternoon at 4:30, and we'll see, who in the room has come up maybe with a good solution for that. Also, think of what you do best. Something good you do, like a real great solution, and share that. Okay, so there's great programming here. I'm just mentioning a few. Matt mentioned a few things also. I think the ACR and ABR updates are fantastic. And the good news this year is they're not at 7 a.m., right? Because everybody would just blow those off. People you don't even know. But this year's speakers are great. They couldn't be any better, right? Bib Allen, he's the chair of the ACR Board of Chancellors, and Kay Vittorini. She's the associate executive of the ABR. So these are the people you want to talk to you, and they're talking to you. I mean, their talks are specifically designed for residents. They're going to talk about resident issues, and you should feel comfortable asking them hard questions. Case sessions are also, I think, great. It's a real perk of this conference. This conference obviously revolves around leadership and mentoring and things like that, and not so much of radiology, but the case sessions that we have scheduled for this week are fantastic. So don't miss those, particularly if you're a third year, right, studying for the core exam. At least, it'll feel like you're getting something in. This is really important. This might be the most important slide I have. Have fun while you're here. That's me and my 3 chiefs from last year in New Orleans, and that was a lot of fun. So I want you all to go out and have fun with residents from other programs, all right? Mind-blowing, right? But that's important. You're all here. We talked about the fact that you've basically been walking on the same pathway, this bizarre job that's interesting, it's fun, and sometimes it's totally painful. But you're all doing the same thing. You have so much in common. You should sort of be assertive and introduce yourselves and make arrangements to go out. So the dude on the left, his name's Sean. It's his birthday today. Where's Sean? Sean's in the middle over there. There's Sean. It's his birthday tonight. So this is a good segue. Yes. Any other birthdays? Anybody else have a birthday today? Oh, the dude in the front row. What program are you from? MUSC. Now that is a nice program. Charleston, right? I mean, come on. So it's his birthday too. So everybody's going out, right? We just need sort of a plan. So I'm not sure who's in charge of the plan, but there's 2 birthday boys, and tonight's covered. So it's on you guys to figure out the rest. Okay, one more thing, and I believe this. The most radical thing that you can do is introduce people to each other. And this conference really leverages that power like no other because of who's here, of the networking potential. Okay, so just, if you're standing talking to a group of residents and other people walk up, just stop what you're doing and make introductions, because it really opens up the conversation and it opens up new relationships. If you know of a trainee, who is dying to meet a faculty member from your institution, please go out of your way and try to make that happen. Break the ice. It's so easy to do, and it can really change your career. I believe that. Okay, so these are your goals for this week. This is what's really important. You need to network. So again, think of what you're trying to do right now at your point in your career. If it's, getting an academic job someplace, wherever that might be, a fellowship position, to do research at a certain institution, and really target that. Start with the chiefs and work your way up. Find out who's here, who you need to talk to. So you should come away from this conference with like 10 new contacts. Half of them should be faculty, I think. All right, that would be a great goal. Introduce people to each other. It's so hard to remember to do it, but it's really important, I think, especially at a place like this. Go out with residents from other programs. You flew all the way to San Diego. You don't want to go out with the same dudes that you spend, every day with, right? Get ideas for your programs, things that aren't working well, come up with a plan, and just have fun. Okay, so I have a little bit of time. I'm actually going to talk about your life as a chief resident. Who is this? Does anybody know who this is? Sisyphus. So multiple people knew that. That's great. So this is a figure in Greek mythology, Sisyphus. He was the most deceitful of all men. He was the king of what is now Corinth, Greece. And so the gods punished him, and his punishment was to roll an enormous boulder up a hill, only to get to the top and watch it roll back down to the bottom. And of course, he had to repeat this action for eternity. Unfortunately, I've known a few residents who feel like what they do on a daily basis is kind of like what this guy's doing for eternity. Has your job gotten to the point where you're feeling more like a service-oriented Sisyphus than a leader? Is being a chief a bit too mundane from the mindless repetition of daily activities? Is it more about toil and less about opportunity, like you thought it would be? Do you even feel like a leader most days? And would you do it again if given the chance? Okay, so there's 4 ideas I have. They're personal, they're things I think would benefit a chief resident at your stage of development and where you're heading. And I think they'll make you feel less like Sisyphus and more like a real leader. And you'll read a lot of interesting leadership skills and 5 keys to leadership. If you follow certain people on Twitter, it's like every day you see all these retweets about leadership. But these are what I feel are most important. Okay, number 1 is to learn how to frame an issue. And so what do I mean by framing an issue? I think this is perfect. You guys are so well positioned to practice this framing an issue. And it starts with recognizing a problem. And we know that chiefs are usually the first people to understand that there's a problem or recognize it, because people come to you, or you're kind of in the trenches and the front lines to begin with, and you see that there's a problem. But it's not enough to just say, whoa, there's a problem, because we do that all the time. Framing an issue is more sort of organized and elaborate than that. You want to understand the problem. You want to study it, find out what the potential sources are, all the stakeholders, if it's an issue with like the emergency room attendings and getting prelim reports or I don't know what, something like that. You want to know all sides of the story, all the stakeholders and their feelings. And then you want to identify potential opportunities that your department could really make based on solving that problem. And have all that sort of done, and then convene a meeting of the stakeholders. So have your department, the chair, the program director, maybe somebody from the emergency department, and talk about the issues, talk about the problems, the root of the problems, and then potential opportunities for solving it. If you frame an issue like that, you will really stand out as a leader. And you've probably all heard people do this, and it's a real, I think, a strategy that takes a lot of practice. But you guys, again, are in perfect position to have lots of opportunity for that. Become an ambassador or a liaison to another society. This may not sort of be on your radar for something you would do as a leader or to practice leadership skills, but I think it is really valuable. When you can become a representative of your organization, whether it's your department or a group like A Cubed, and then put yourself in another environment, okay? So some other group, and you see how they practice business, how they run their business. You see the things that they value. You can take that information back with you to radiology, to your local environment, and apply that. And not only that, is when you become the representative, you really feel like you need to be the face of your department. You need to know your department, the mission of your department. And it makes you, I think, know who you are even better. So you get to learn different values, you represent your group and understand who you are. And as luck would have it, and this has been brought up several times now, tomorrow at 5:30, right, there's elections for chief residents. Not just elections for the executive sort of committee, the president, vice president, but for the steering committee. And the steering committee has a lot of positions that are what we call liaison positions. So you could become the representative of A Cubed. You would represent all of your people to like the AMA or the ABR or the ACR or the APDR. And many times you get to attend their national meeting, their annual meeting. And so you're the resident rep representing A Cubed. Okay, so that's a great opportunity as long as you can make the meeting and as long as you can come up with the funding to go. And at the elections, we'll go through that. There's a great PowerPoint that's going to tell you where everything's at and all the dates. So you just have to be there. Again, tomorrow, 5:30, great opportunity. Here's something that's very important and easy to forget. We all struggle with this. If you have something important to talk about, if it's worthwhile, then you need to do it in person. All right, you've got to be like face to face. We tend to want to use email. It's so easy. You can get so much work done, right? Sitting and doing email. You can crank a bunch of stuff off. But if it's important, email will basically strip away all the humanity from your conversation. And people often feel confused or suspicious about what you're trying to say. I mean, they just don't understand. There's so much that gets lost in the translation and email. So don't be tempted to use it for important things. If you're asking like, hey, can we change the meeting to noon tomorrow? That's fine, but nothing that's important. Okay. Is anybody, other than the IU people, nobody from IU, does anybody know who this guy is? Gunderman, that's right. So this is Richard Gunderman. He may be our most prolific writer and thinker in radiology. Certainly he's one of them. He got his PhD in philosophy from the University of Chicago before starting medical school. He stayed at the University of Chicago for medical school and residency. This photo is from residency. He was chief resident, University of Chicago, 1996. Gunderman. A chance to image is a chance to cure, is what he still wears suspenders every day. Okay. I consider Richard my closest and most cherished mentor. He's here at this meeting, and you can hear him speak. But I think the real touchstone of what makes him successful and what makes him tick is what I have written up there. The fact that everything he does is an effort to help others be successful. It's not for himself. He doesn't do anything selfishly. All of the things he does, and he does a lot. He collaborates with many people in many disciplines. He's a mentor to many. He's a prolific writer. But this sort of idea of enabling others to succeed and using that, I think, as a central tenet to leadership is something we can all do and we should all strive for. So as a chief, gosh, there's so many things you could do. You certainly can mentor medical students and junior residents. You can try to involve them in committees that may be in your department. Maybe committees that don't even have resident members right now involve residents. There's a lot of great leadership organizations and opportunities out there right now. Every year there's a Introduction to Academic Radiology program. There's the Darel program that's happening right now at this conference. There's the Radiology Leadership Institute. You can help nominate residents in your program to do these that you think would do a good job. Your state has a radiology society, your own state radiology society. Find out if they have a resident and fellow section. Many of them don't. Our senior chief resident found out that Indiana didn't, so he started the Indiana resident and fellow section of our own radiology society, and it's great. There's a lot of advocate type work that you can do there. So there's a lot of things you can do as a chief to enable others to succeed. So those are my 4 main, I think, keys to success for people in your level, is to frame issues and to start practicing the art of doing that. Try to become a liaison or an ambassador to some organization. Try to remember to communicate in person and to avoid email. And then finally, to help others to succeed. Thank you.
Just want to give people a chance to ask any questions you have. Use the microphone if you can. All right, I'll start us off. So with being a chief resident, there's obviously a lot of responsibility and a lot of time commitment, but at the same time, it is a springboard to get into some better opportunities and to take on additional leadership skills. So how do you go about evaluating how fruitful those opportunities are going to be, both at the local level, the national level, and state level, as you mentioned?
That's a good question because, as chiefs, you guys don't have unlimited amounts of time, right? You should probably be very smart with the projects that you undertake. And hopefully you have a mentor who can help guide you through that and let you know what's going to be a high-yield activity to take part in. There's two sides to this. Certainly we want to learn a lot of these skills and understand a part of this leadership. The other side is, to be quite honest, some things look really good on your CV applying for fellowship, right? So you think about both sides. You want to learn skills and you want to get the most bang for your buck, for your time and your energy. So for instance, for tomorrow and the elections, you'll see a PowerPoint that one of my chiefs made, and they're going to go through each one of these positions, these steering committee positions. There's a lot of them. Like this is a position right here to moderate a session or to put together the problem-solving session or the Brogdon panel or the case sessions or to be a liaison to the AMA. And one of the important things he includes is how much time it requires to do that. And that's important because you know how busy you are. You know what your fellowship application is going to be like and what other irons you have in the fire. So rely on your mentors for sure. And in the case of, I think, the elections tomorrow, you'll have a good indication for the time commitment in the PowerPoint. Oh, he's got something to say.
I was also just going to say that, attending a meeting like this, you get to hear about legislative advocacy through the ACR and some of the legislation through the ABR, and I think it's a good opportunity to figure out what you're most interested in, and something like Dr. Heitkamp had mentioned before, that something catches your ear or someone seems like kind of an inspiring person to you, that it's at meetings like this that you kind of figure out, oh, I really like that aspect of it. And then just making yourself available or contacting them in person and say, hey, I'm really interested in this topic. And I mean, how many residents go up to the ACR person and say, I really want to get involved and take the next step? I mean, not that many. So if you're one of those people, the opportunities are there for the taking should you want it. I think there's more opportunities available than you realize, and certainly than I realized, just showing up at this meeting for the first time as a new chief. I mean, it's amazing. You can, and I'm also, for the record, I'm not a big networking, going out, if I was in business, I would fail probably. So given that I'm not a big networker, it's amazing how many people I've met and how that's changed my trajectory. And, if you just put yourself out there, it really does make a difference.
I have one question which I think is relevant, touches on some of the topics that both of you guys talked about, and I think maybe it's a lead into some stuff for the idea forum, because I think everybody in here, whether they're an outgoing chief or an incoming chief, has probably had to deal with the problem resident, something both of you guys mentioned. I'd be curious, in this circumstance, I think a lot of times chiefs or residents who are problematic academically sort of self-declare themselves to a lot of the faculty, but residents who have professionalism problems, like they're always late or they're skimping on call or things like that, it's a more challenging or nefarious problem. So I'd be curious from both of you two, do you think that the professionalism issues when residents are having problems, is that best dealt with from the chief resident side, Matt, or from the program director side, Darel?
Well, that's a great question, and it's one that I have thought about a lot. So I'm in my 9th year as program director at IU, and we've never had a resident who has struggled with medical knowledge that we weren't able to remediate, right? We could take care of that. We can fix medical knowledge problems. I've yet to be able to remediate anybody who's had a problem with professionalism. Super hard. By the time they get to residency, man, they're like hardwired. And it's usually an issue where they lack the insight. They just do not understand how they are at all. They don't get it. And so I feel like I haven't been able to make a difference in those folks. So that's definitely a program director level issue. So when a resident is being unprofessional, then, you guys should not have to deal with that. And you do, we know you do, but that should be bumped up, and that stuff needs documented in their chart. So we have to have a conversation with them. We have to go through everything they've done wrong. We have to come up with a plan going forward to work on that. They have to sign it. It's got to be like legit, right? Because we got to start making this paper trail, because chances are it's not going to get better. That's why it needs to be on our level. And in the same way, when there's a faculty member who's acting up, who's unprofessional, who's, got a problem with sexual harassment, that gets bumped up to the chair level. That's beyond my scope. But that's a good question. Anything else? There's a question.
So I guess my question is about these guys with the professionalism complaints. How do you decide when to pour more resources on those guys versus sort of quarantine them so they don't?
That's a great question. And it actually comes up more, at least in my experience, with faculty. So, for instance, the faculty who just gives a terrible board review just sucks, right? They photocopy pictures out of books and put them on a slide, and you can tell they put zero effort into it. The sort of knee-jerk reaction is, they're not giving board reviews anymore. Forget that. In fact, no more noon conferences. But then, it's that's exactly playing into their laziness and their apathy. So I understand what you're saying. You got to hold their feet to the fire somehow. And so we still have those people participate. We don't have them do important things like board review, but we have them do some journal club or some crappy conference like that. But that's a great question. I'm telling you, the professionalism problems are always the hardest. They're always difficult, and you just have to document. You have to maybe try to find them a personal mentor to work through this. But again, just anecdotally, I've never seen anybody who I feel has changed. So don't stress out about that. It may not happen. Anything else? Yes, another question.
I know every situation is different, but in your leadership experience, what is a more successful motivation technique, like the carrot or the stick? Punishing people or giving them reasons or incentives to improve? Because as chief residents, it's kind of hard to use the stick when you really have no power.
Yeah, That's a really good question. That's like a question, this is idea forum kind of stuff, right? So perfect example is at our institution, Indiana, we've never been able to solve the problem of the dumbest, most mundane issue, and that's noon conference attendance. I mean, I can't get people to come to noon conference. And so we've tried carroting the situation and sticking the situation. Doesn't matter. I said, look, if you don't, meet the minimum requirements, I'm going to write a letter and put it in your file. It's documenting the professionalism issue that you have. You're non-professional. And I'm the guy who has to write your letter of recommendation for the rest of your career, because every time you switch jobs or you pick up a new hospital you're reading for, they ask your program director to write a letter or do a verification. So, I thought, that's going to take care of it. That's going to really be the shot across the bow. And so that's, I guess I haven't had a real good experience with that. I think the key is the residents have to buy into it. The residents have to believe in it. Okay? Like the oral boards, the residents believed in the oral boards. Okay? There was buy-in from everybody. Core exam, the jury's still out. So if it's something the residents believe in, I think they're going to do it. But there's going to be issues, I think, both ways. Any thoughts on that?
Just one, which is that I think when you start radiology residency, your mindset is, hey, I come to work, I'm trying to learn, then I go home, and it's a very, I'm here to learn, focused on education. I'm not going to a new conference today because I can learn more by reading a book in the library. And I think that over time that changes to not only a broader idea of what actually is helpful for your learning, but that sense of being a part of the department and doing things kind of for the greater good of the residency or the department. I think that tends to come along as a resident gets older, and I think a lot of that actually doesn't come out until you actually start being in practice and you realize kind of the bigger picture rather than just what you are doing individually. And I think that one argument, or to get that going earlier, was what Peter Liu said earlier, which is that once it kind of clicks that, hey, I better be a good resident because this kind of determines that outcome that I want, that may not be the mindset initially, but if you're actually thinking of that, or once that clicks, I think that the buy-in starts happening a little bit more.
So that will conclude the leadership session. Let's thank Drs. Heitkamp and Hammer for their thoughts.